Week 7 games are complete, as is the case with every NFL week. A lot of action, a lot of storylines. We also saw some injuries, which always sucks, and it's going to have an impact to these teams the rest of the way. Unfortunately, injuries are a part of this game, and it becomes especially magnified when it happens to the key contributors. We saw some big performances as well. Saquon Barkley destroyed the New York Giants, which was actually extra impressive because everyone was saying that was going to happen. Then it did. Joe Burrow got his first career win at Cleveland. Sounds kind of crazy to put it that way, but that's just how it's worked out thus far for him in his career. Chiefs defense just completely shut down the 49ers, forced 3 picks from Brock Purdy. Niners never really got the run game going. The feel-good story coming out of that one was the Ricky Pearsall playing in his first NFL game after being shot on August 31st. So, again, just awesome to see him out there. The Commanders embarrassed the Panthers. Marcus Mariota played most of that one from late first quarter on, following the Jaden Daniels injury. But it didn't matter. The Panthers, as only the Panthers can, made him look like 2014 Oregon Marcus Mariota when he was slinging the pill up in Eugene on his way to winning the Heisman Trophy. That defense is awful. The Panthers are a joke, going nowhere fast. They have been a disaster since David Tepper bought the team. Jets Steelers, Sunday night game, did not go so well for the Jets. We'll get into that one. And then we had another Monday night 2-game lineup. Let's start with Thursday night. Broncos at Saints. It was a, Drew Brees night of sorts. They honored him at halftime. Obviously the homecoming for Sean Payton. And one of the worst Thursday night games that I can remember, at least in recent memory. Just wholly uninteresting, was never really competitive, and let's just hope we get some better matchups as we move through the rest of the season. Like when it is a standalone game and that is what you get, it kind of takes you back to 10 years ago when we were criticizing these Thursday night games, saying it was a shit product and they should do away with it and just stick to Sunday and Monday. And, I think it's come around since then. We've certainly gotten a ton of compelling matchups. Look at Buccaneers and Falcons from a couple of weeks ago. But get that Broncos-Saints game away from me. I do not want to see that kind of football on Thursday night. Now, coming into it, at one point, the Saints are 2-0. They're on top of the world. They're throwing parades after they beat the Cowboys. The offense was humming. And now all of the players are injured. And they've lost 5 straight. And Dennis Allen seems way in over his head. There was a sequence at the end of the first half where he did not know they only had 2 timeouts on that last drive. How is that possible? He is the head coach. On the drive before that, the Broncos' offensive drive, that was the one where Matthew drops the pick that Bo Nix just throws right into his hands. But they used a timeout to preserve some time on that last Broncos drive headed into the first half. So how do you, then when your team has the ball, how do you not know that you have 2 timeouts and not 3? That was, obviously they got nothing done. They didn't move the ball at all, but that was just a bad look to be out there messing around, not doing much of anything. You blow these timeouts and then you take a knee to end the first half, that I thought that summed up the night for what the Saints did. Their defense is not what it's been over the past few years. Now, they are very injured, but I think they've taken a step back. I mean, this defense was top-notch, going back a couple of seasons, and some of these players are just, they're getting a little bit older, and then when you suffer some of these injuries, you're just not kind of what you once were, and I wouldn't look at this Saints defense the way we would have in 2022 or even in 2023. I think the Derek Carr injury ended their season. Now, I realize Derek is not going to be out for the season, but it just seems like, he goes out late in that game against Kansas City, obviously hasn't played now the last couple of weeks, and even before that, he was not playing well. But that's Derek. He looked like the MVP level player to start the season. Then he's back to throwing into double and triple coverage and turning the ball over. And you can't win like that. So whether Derek comes back, I shouldn't say whether he comes back. He will be back. But no Rashid Shaheed. Chris Olave goes out. He's dealing with the concussion. You would assume he's going to be back sometime in the next couple of weeks. But I just think this is one of those deals where the Saints, what looks so promising, you have a new offensive coordinator in Clint Kubiak. You are running over teams those first couple of weeks, and your fans are throwing the parade. And it was almost like if you could go back to one play and say, where did things change? And again, they've suffered a ton of injuries. They're banged up on the offensive line. Their skill position, basically everyone, it feels like, except for Alvin Kamara and Juwan Johnson are injured right now. But if you could go back to one play that felt like that was the one that kind of turned the season for the Saints, it was when they have that ugly game against the Eagles, they have them on the ropes, and they give up that back-breaking, long pass play to Dallas Goedert, where he goes for like 60-plus, sets up the winning score for the Eagles. In true Derek Carr fashion, makes a terrible decision throwing into double coverage on that last drive there. Ultimately, the Saints lose that game. But I think that play where you're watching Goddard streak down the sideline, that was what turned the season for the Saints. They are now 2-5. They got crushed at home. And I actually saw towards the end of that game, when the camera is flashing and panning to people in the stands, you saw some of the, old school patented paper bags on the heads of the Saints fans. I think they punt on this season, and, we'll see what changes 2025 brings. But, yeah, unfortunately, sorry for the Saints fans out there, but I think you've seen this all too often in the past, and I think you're back there for 2024. The Broncos defense has looked really good all season. They dominated the Saints. Now, they should have, right, just given what we mentioned with the Saints' injuries. But still, that unit has been very consistent for them. Still have some questions on Bo Nix. He made some head-scratching plays. Now, look, they didn't need him to win the game for them on Thursday night. He certainly didn't lose the game for them, but he did not. If that game was competitive and, let's just say in a hypothetical world, the Broncos lose that game, there were quite a few plays you could go back to and say, what the hell was he doing? On that one, how does he... I don't know if I've ever seen a quarterback overthrow and underthrow receivers on the same play, right? He's like scrambling to his left. He's got a guy wide open, maybe 15 yards down the field. Another about 25 yards down the field. He overshoots the guy, no chance for the first receiver to catch it, and just nowhere near the second receiver. It's like, what are you doing? You are the 12th overall pick in the draft. Put it on the guy. I just don't like where he was drafted. And I know I've kind of been negative on him in some previous episodes, but I do not get the thinking behind taking him in the first round, at least call it first round 12th where they did take him, and not getting more value at that pick. And then look, if Sean Payton really thought Nix was the guy, take him in the second round. Or if you're worried somebody else is going to grab him, then put a trade package together, get back up in there late into the first round, and then you take him. I am not into the philosophy of, some people say, if the guy you want, the guy you think needs to be in your franchise, if he's there, you take him, regardless of what pick it is. No, that is not how it works. I think they could have done much better taking a skill position player, taking an offensive lineman, taking an impact defensive player, and you still could have drafted Nix. When you look at some of what he's doing so far, now, to his credit, he's made some plays for them. He's certainly athletic. There's no question about that. We've seen him put 20, 25, 30-yard runs together. Certainly is a playmaker, but I don't understand some of the decisions he makes, some of the, at times, just poor fundamentals he shows, given the experience he has. Remember back in 2017 when the Bears drafted Mitch Trubisky number 2 overall. I think it was number 2. It was high in the draft regardless, but the Bears took Trubisky, and I remember at the time the talking point on him was, hey, this guy has minimal starting experience in major college football. I want to say he started something like 15 or 16 games, and that was kind of the, hey, he's a highly touted prospect, a lot of talent, but what about the experience? Could that potentially be a factor when he gets to the league? And Nix was the opposite. I think he started something like 60-ish games in his college career, or he either has the record or is somewhere close to the record of most starts ever by any college quarterback. So you would assume, given, he had crazy stats in college. I mean, his final couple of seasons at Oregon were pretty eye-popping when you look at the numbers on paper. But I'm not sure. I mean, if you start that many games playing major college football and you come into the league, and look, it's still early in his career, but we'll see if Sean Payton is the quarterback whisperer. But I'm just kind of looking at this Broncos team right now as they're not winning because of Bo Nix, but I would also say they're not winning in spite of him, right? I don't think he's hurting them. I just don't see him elevating them. And again, I've said this before, if you're going to be the 12th overall pick, the team's using the first round draft pick on you, you're the quarterback, you have to be a difference maker. And so far, I don't think we can say Bo Nix is a difference maker. Broncos, 4-3. They have the Panthers next week, so they probably go to 5-3. But then they go to Baltimore, to Kansas City, and then home against the Falcons. So over the course of, call it the next month, I think we're going to learn a lot about just where this Bo Nix, Sean Payton experiment is. Eagles-Giants. Joe Shane and Brian Daboll have been on a downward trajectory ever since that 2022 season where they made the playoffs and they beat the Vikings on the road in the wild card game. You know that emoji that it's a chart, it looks negative with the red line goes top left to bottom right? That's Shane and Daboll ever since that season. I've said it before, and I'm not going to back off of it because it's inexplicable when you consider the math and the eye test, which is really saying something when you get both of those wrong. You're always going to have people in kind of this metrics analytics side and kind of backed into that corner. Then you have other people in like the gut, eye test portion. And Saquon Barkley played the 2022 season on the fifth-year option. He was drafted in 2018. They picked up his fifth year prior to the 2021 season. So 2022, he's on his fifth-year option. He was the best player on the team. He was the reason they made the playoffs and won that Vikings game. Daniel Jones never played on the fifth year in 2023. Remember, he was drafted in 2019, but he never played on the fifth year because prior to 2022, when the Giants hired Brian Daboll, they did not exercise the fifth year on Jones. As soon as Daboll was hired, you pick up that option, and they didn't. And I realize you can go back and say, well, in those first three seasons, and I fully acknowledge this, Daniel Jones did nothing in his first three seasons as a Giant to warrant exercising the fifth-year option, which basically would have guaranteed him, $22-23+ million for the 2023 season. And I'm not playing the result here. I'm simply looking at the circumstances of who was hired, the roster you had, and you knew, if you're the Giants, that the best player on your team, at the time, the face of your franchise in Saquon Barkley, you knew he would be coming due for a second contract. And look, Daniel Jones, stating the obvious, right? Captain Obvious here. Daniel Jones is not Josh Allen. But you have to look at the similarities and say, Brian Daboll largely credited with taking Josh Allen from a project into the superstar that we now know him as today. Daniel Jones, similar size, has wheels, right? A lot of athleticism there, certainly more athletic than the average quarterback. Daniel Jones, also a major project. So as soon as you decide you're going to hire Brian Daboll and Daniel Jones is your quarterback, a guy who has a lot of the same physical traits as Josh Allen. Again, to be clear, not saying Daniel Jones is anywhere near as good as Josh Allen. You need to say, you know what? We're going to pick up this option because worst case scenario, this guy's our quarterback for the next couple of seasons. We may be, paying him too much in 2023, but it's a short-term too much because there's no contract there. Certainly not to the extent of the way it played out, where what happens in 22? They end up, as I said, make the playoffs. They win that playoff game. Daniel Jones, if we want to look at, again, kind of the analytics, metrics of it, but then also the eye test, Daniel Jones was not bad by any means in 2022. He was also not deserving, not even close, to the deal he ultimately gets at 4 for $160. That all could have been prevented had they picked up the fifth year. Because then you know what? You say, we're going to pay this guy about 20, I forget what the exact number would have been for that draft class, or for Daniel Jones, I should say specifically, on the fifth year. But let's just say it's closer to $20 million. So then you have Daniel Jones in 2023 at $20 million instead of Daniel Jones at $40 million in 2023 as part of a long-term deal at 4 for $160. Now, I know the offensive line was banged up last year, and it was a terrible season for the Giants. Daniel Jones was not good. He ends up getting injured. Saquon Barkley, if you remember going into that season, there was a back and forth between they franchised him, and he said he wouldn't play on the franchise tag, and then they kept negotiating, and ultimately they basically got to a a deal that more or less paid him at the franchise number, but wasn't as a formality, it was not the franchise tag. But ultimately, the Giants made the decision to pay Daniel Jones and not pay Saquon Barkley when they very easily could have avoided that. Again, picking up the 5th year. And sitting here right now, the result of that would have been, one, the Giants could have said, let's just say 2023 goes exactly as we saw. The Giants either would not have Daniel Jones on the roster in 2024, or they would have said, look, you had a horrendous year. You're coming off of an injury. Here's 2 years for $20 million. Show us what you got. They also would have had Saquon Barkley still on the roster. And ultimately, they would have paid significantly less money or have significantly less cap charges and have the better player on the roster in Barkley. But that's not how it went. And huge mistake for the Giants. And then you go into Sunday, Saquon Barkley owned the Giants. And I said this at the top of the episode. It is not often in the NFL that going into a game with such a heavy majority of people thinking something is going to happen, and then it happens pretty much exactly as it was predicted. Barkley could have easily scored another touchdown or two if Jalen Hurts doesn't score those 2 rushing touchdowns. He averaged over 10 yards per carry. That would be absurd in a Power 5 college football game, let alone in the NFL, especially given the circumstances where all eyes are on you. You're going up against your former team. There's high expectations, and he met them. Fair to say he surpassed them. I don't think anyone saw 10.4 yards per carry. And Saquon was a class act about it, said all the right things, leading up to the game, on the field right after the game, and then in the post-game presser. He did not take the bait. He let his on-field play do the talking. The Giants feel like a 5-12 team, and it's hard for me to see how you justify bringing back Shane and Daboll if that is where they end up in 2024. Amari Cooper made his Bills debut on Sunday. I had to laugh on that first target because less than 48 hours after I come on here and say, hey, those Amari Cooper drops that were happening in Cleveland, I expect those to stop when he's playing with a top quarterback in an offense with some rhythm. And then immediately, on his first target as a Bill, Josh Allen goes to him on that 3rd down play, hits Cooper right in the hands, he drops it. Now, to his credit, he ended up having a nice game given the circumstances of getting there midweek and just being thrust into the lineup. Finished with 4 catches on 5 targets. The only one, was that drop. He had 66 yards and a touchdown. The touchdown was actually on a Josh Allen check at the line. Cooper had to ask Keon Coleman what route to run. He was kind of looking down. Coleman was on the bottom of the screen, and Cooper was in the slot. And you can see him look down to Coleman after Josh Allen makes the call at the line, like, hey, what am I running here? And Coleman just kind of, not so discreetly, like points, like, yeah, just kind of run straight or, run to the post. And it worked out. They scored the touchdown. Keep an eye on this Bills offense. I really think they are just getting started. I thought they left some plays out there. Now, it's hard to criticize a team when they dominate a game like that, but if you look back at the offensive performance for the Bills, I would say there's still a really, kind of big potential offense that they have with the Amari Cooper addition, and I'm excited to see where it goes. No real in-depth thoughts on the Titans other than they need to draft a quarterback in 2025. They are so bad on offense. They are not worth talking about until further notice. They do not have a capable NFL quarterback on the roster, and that's a tough position to be in for a first-year head coach in Brian Callahan. But hey, welcome to being a first-year head coach in the NFL. I mentioned earlier that Joe Burrow got his first win on the road against the Cleveland Browns of his career. I would imagine maybe one or perhaps more of those had something to do with the injury in the rookie season, and then last year, where I would assume he had missed at least one of those games. But the Cincinnati Bengals are once again slowly climbing back into it in the AFC. A lot of season to go, but this is kind of what they do. They start slow, they put some wins together, and ultimately creep back into the AFC playoff picture. Now, even though it's early, I really do not see them competing for the division. I think the AFC North will ultimately come down to Pittsburgh and Baltimore, but I think this is another year where we're going to see three teams from the AFC North potentially, make it to the postseason, or at least we'll see a third team be close. The Cleveland Browns season was over long before this game. Then they traded Amari Cooper last week, and that kind of signaled that they're punting on the season. At 1-5, which is where they were when they traded Amari Cooper, there was no hope, especially with Deshaun Watson playing quarterback. And then he goes down with the Achilles injury in week 7. DTR comes in, and then he ended up getting hurt. So you're probably looking at Jameis Winston next week, who, by the way, just gave the epitome of scam artist, televangelical, while he was spewing a bunch of bullshit in his post-game interview. Just no self-awareness, and he really has never had it. I mean, Jameis Winston, even going back to Florida State, that season after the Heisman, by the way, which was clouded with the sexual assault allegations the year that they won the national championship and he won the Heisman Trophy. That season after, he had an incident where I want to say he was in like a student center or student union, somewhere like a centralized place on campus, and he said some dumb shit. And I'm not going to repeat it on here. It's on the internet. Search it if you're not aware of what I'm talking about. But he then got suspended for being an idiot and saying what he said. And then I remember that next game, even though the news was Jameis Winston is suspended, he comes out for warm-ups of that game, full pads, just suits up, almost as if he didn't believe that he was actually suspended. And so when I say lack of self-awareness, case in point. And then when he gets to the NFL, and I want to say it was either 2016 or 2017, he was accused of groping an Uber driver, which ultimately the NFL found enough evidence, even though I don't know if there were criminal charges brought, but he then served a 3-game suspension. So Jameis Winston being or feeling he has some sort of role as a moral arbiter, like, what the hell are you thinking? Just shut your mouth on this topic. Like, if you're going to defend Deshaun Watson, and I understand, part of the message, and yeah, as shitty of a person it seems Deshaun Watson is, I don't think you should necessarily be cheering a guy's significant injury. But for Jameis Winston, of all people, given his past, when enough things come to light, whether it's circumstantial or hearsay, there's a pattern there. And I just found it completely absurd that Jameis Winston was the one who thought he should be lecturing Browns fans and us as viewers on what is right and what was wrong. Like, dude, just shut your mouth. Now, I will say it was awesome to see Nick Chubb back out there for the Browns. That was a gruesome knee injury last year in that Monday night game against Pittsburgh. And he has dealt with a lot. And that guy is just very easy to root for. Rough injuries. He was probably a first-round pick without that injury he suffered at Georgia. Obviously, just a awful. I don't even want to watch the replay again against the Steelers last year. Another knee injury. And that guy he's a grinder. Works hard, big-time producer, kind of a soft-spoken dude. In some ways, the Browns, as shitty as this season has gone for them, I'm happy for them that at least they have a true, at least from all things we know, just a good guy to root for the rest of the way. They obviously have no chance at the playoffs. They didn't coming into the game, but seeing Nick Chubb back out there, I really hope that he's got a few more years left because that guy just seems like he deserves it. 49ers and Chiefs was in the game of the week time slot with the Fox A team calling that one, TB12 and Burkhart. After that game, I have to say, the Andy Reid versus Kyle Shanahan matchup, he owns Andy Reid I'm talking about. He owns the 49ers. The Andy versus Kyle matchup it's similar to the Kyle Shanahan versus Sean McVay matchup, in which it's completely lopsided on one side. Now maybe I'm not remembering all the games that Andy and Kyle have coached against each other, but I believe in the two Super Bowls, obviously the Chiefs are 2-0 in those, and even in regular season matchups, the Chiefs played at San Francisco in 2022. That was the first game for Christian McCaffrey as a 49er. And then obviously this week, they go back to Levi Stadium, and they beat them again. And the reason I bring up the Shanahan-McVay matchup is Kyle owns their obviously division opponents. Mathematically, winning percentage-wise, Kyle has won basically all of those games other than the first game this year in which the 49ers completely blew that game against the Rams, and the one that really counted a couple of years ago when in Los Angeles, in SoFi Stadium, 49ers lose to the Rams in the year that the Rams go on to win the Super Bowl. But until the 49ers get a game on the Chiefs, this really isn't a rivalry. They are otherwise just over the last 5 years, best team in the league, which is the Kansas City Chiefs, who happen to play in the AFC. It's best team in the league versus one of the better teams in the NFC. And that's kind of where it stands. It's not a rivalry. Now, it's always a big deal when they play each other. And for the foreseeable future, I would expect it will continue to be a big deal. But this thing is just getting to a point where Andy he owns the matchup. And the 49ers, not the season or not the start that they were looking for, but they just can't seem to take down the Chiefs. Now, it was a huge loss for the 49ers early on. Brandon Ayuk gets we found out on Monday, but tears his ACL and MCL. Just a brutal hit. It looked terrible in real speed, and even worse when they showed it on the slow-mo replay. Debo missed most of the game with an illness. We then found out he was hospitalized with pneumonia. So hopefully Debo is okay, because pneumonia is some scary stuff from a real-life perspective. Forget football, right? Just hope Debo Samuel is okay. Christian McCaffrey still TBD on when he's going to come back, but just not a good showing for the 49ers. I still think they are the best overall team in the NFC West. But record-wise, I think 2024 NFC West is going to be a lot closer than what we maybe would have assumed going into the season. Now, keep in mind, the 49ers lost to both the Rams and the Cardinals in the first matchups for the season against those divisional opponents. They blew leads in both of those games. And so if, again, record-wise, this thing is close in the NFC West, it could get a little weird when you start to factor in the tiebreakers, given that they have, they beat the Seahawks. 49ers own the Seahawks, but dropping those games to the Rams and Cardinals, I think that comes back into play later in the season when they, ultimately match up for a second time. On the field, Patrick Mahomes, how does he always seem to just always get enough yardage for the first down? How? He's certainly not built like a world-class athlete. Doesn't have elite speed. I mean, I want to say he was like a 4.8 guy at the combine. But somehow, he just always seemed... That long run in the second half when I don't know if he got 25, 30 plus on it, but he takes off and he's like pump faking 10, 15 yards down the field. And you want to say, and look, at real speed, I can only imagine how difficult that is, but it's like, why are the 49ers defenders biting on forward pass pump fakes when this dude is 10 yards beyond the line of scrimmage? But, I mean, I said this on Sunday, it must be frustrating if you are a top-notch athlete playing defense and you run 4.4, 4.5, and Patrick Mahomes somehow pulls the okie doke on you and just back-breaking first down. It just always feels like, despite not being a great athlete, or at least not what we look at him in terms of a player profile as, Patrick Mahomes just, when he takes off, he always seems to get there. And then the run into the end zone against, when he just trucks Mustafa, that was, at that point, I didn't think Mustafa was going to get to him anyway. And look, he made his best effort, but you almost look back at that and go, dude, he was going to score even if you make the tackle, like he probably reaches over the end line. But now that thing lives on forever. Like, you were just completely truck stick by Patrick Mahomes. Now, the Chiefs' offense is lacking explosiveness. We will see if they make a move going into the trade deadline. They're doing this thing with defense and making just enough plays on offense to the point where they're able to win these games. But bottom line, they are the two-time defending champs. They are the only undefeated team remaining in the NFL. They have a badass defense. And until further notice, the Chiefs are the best team in the league. The Sunday night game had some juice. Davante Adams was traded midweek to the Jets. We also got the news that Russell Wilson would be taking over as the starter for the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Jets were coming off of a bad loss at home on Monday night to the Bills. They had multiple chances to win that game. Felt like they would win that game, especially in the second half. They don't get it done. Tons of penalties. It was kind of a hard watch despite it being a competitive game. But they come into the Steelers game. It's the second game with Brick as the interim head coach. Overall, I thought it was an entertaining game, which sounds odd given the final score, but it was definitely one that you had to watch kind of from start to finish. But the Jets lose again, and they are now 2-5. It was a weird game flow. The Jets started pretty fast. Breece Hall getting chunk plays. Russell Wilson made some throws in that first quarter that immediately had you questioning if he was even a capable NFL quarterback. Like, as bad as it looked sometimes there in Denver in those 2 seasons, it was worse early on in the game Sunday night. He was missing some of those throws he was missing them by yards. It was awful. But somehow he kept going, turns it around, ends up, I wouldn't say prime Russell Wilson, Seahawks, let Russ cook, but he made, to his credit, made some big-time throws, leads the Steelers to a win, and ultimately they crushed the Jets. Now, it is a lackluster Steelers offense, but it is working. And I would say this, given how talented the Steelers are on defense, the leadership they have in Tomlin, and TJ Watt, Highsmith, Minkah Fitzpatrick, Cam Hayward, the Steelers, if Russell Wilson, and I know a lot of people want to get into the weeds on the advanced metrics in 2023, but if Russell Wilson can play like the Russell Wilson we saw last year with the Broncos, I think the Steelers easily get to 10 or 11 wins, and they keep pace that make the AFC North interesting. I very much think this thing could be a coin toss between the Steelers and the Ravens. Now, they play the Giants this upcoming week. They should easily get to 6-2, which coming into this season, a lot of people were hating on the quarterback situation between Russ and Justin Fields. I had said going into this season that they just needed competent quarterback play, which they have gotten so far, and we'll see what Russ looks like moving forward, but I think this Steelers team is potentially the division winner, definitely making the playoffs. I do not see how they don't put enough wins together to ultimately get to the postseason. Back to the Jets. They're 2-5. I saw this stat, and I have no idea what the math that goes into this is. I'm going to trust it because clearly there's something in the formula that gets to this number. I was quite frankly surprised when I saw it. I forget if it was, I don't know if it was Monday morning or Tuesday morning, that someone, or there was a graphic that flashed that showed the Jets having a 47% chance, 47%, basically a coin flip, at 2-5 to make the playoffs. Again, no idea how that number, they ultimately arrive at that, but for all of the talk about, when a team goes 0-2 and you'll inevitably have matchups in week 3 between 0-2 teams, and you'll hear, this is of utmost importance because teams that go 0-3, basically it's a death sentence. So what I don't understand is, if that's the case, how is a team that is now sitting at 2-5 essentially a coin flip chance at making the playoffs? But look, we'll see how it plays out. The next 4 for the Jets, they've got the Patriots this week. They're on the road. They should win that game. They need to win that game. Forget should. The Jets absolutely have to be 3-5 coming out of that game with New England. They've already crushed them earlier this season on the Thursday night game. Regardless of how they do it, that thing absolutely needs to be a W. They then host the Texans, short week, Thursday night football. Texans are a good team. Then they go to Arizona, and then they go into the bye week. So they play the Colts, then they go into the bye week. So let's just say, conservatively speaking, The Texans are a much better football team than the Jets. So if you say they're going to lose that game, if they go 3-1, that puts them at 5-6 going into the bye. With 6 games remaining, based on the way they've played so far, what indications are there that the Jets are somehow going to ultimately make the postseason? Because I have a hard time seeing how any team with more than 8 losses makes it to the postseason in the AFC. So if you have 6 going into your bye week, you essentially have to go 5-1 or 4-2 to get to 9-8, and even at that, 9-8 does not guarantee you a playoff spot. So, yeah, I don't know if I'm buying that 47%, but hey, that's why they play the games. If this thing was decided on paper, we wouldn't be tuned in and focused on it week to week. But keep an eye on these next 4 for the Jets, because if they don't go at least 3-1, I think their season is over going into the bye. Monday Night Football, another 2-game affair. We don't say doubleheader here because, again, they are not true doubleheaders. There is overlap between the dual Monday night games, usually about 3/4-ish. The one I want to start with is Baltimore Ravens are now 5-2. They that one wasn't close against the Buccaneers. Lamar Jackson has 5 touchdowns. And look, the Ravens showed you what the difference is between top-level organizations and the rest of the league. They start off 0-2. They lose a very competitive game on the road, opening Thursday night game in Kansas City. Isaiah Likely steps, just on the end line in the back of the end zone, wipes the touchdown off the board, and they lose their opener. Then they go home. They have a double-digit lead in the second half. I think it was even in the fourth quarter against the Vegas Raiders, and they somehow lose that game, and they drop to 0-2. Most teams who would have that kind of start to the season, they're not coming back from that. They're going into a shell. They're 0-2. They lose a close one. They blow one that they absolutely, under no circumstances, should have lost. And again, that's most of the league. Baltimore Ravens, top-notch organization. Since that Raiders loss, they have won 5 straight. That very next week, they went into Dallas and crushed the Cowboys. Ran all over them. The game was really never close. And now they're sitting at 5-2. And Lamar Jackson, the reigning NFL MVP, once again looks like a potential MVP candidate. They are right back into it in the division. As I said earlier, the Ravens or the Steelers are going to win the AFC North. And last season's number 1 seed in the AFC, the Ravens very much have a chance at that again. And I know the Chiefs are undefeated, but as we talked about, that offense isn't, quite what you would expect. And so a lot of season to go, but 5-2 Baltimore and potentially wins the division. And who knows, maybe gets the number 1 seed once again. Tough loss for the Buccaneers on the Godwin injury. Potentially season ending from what we heard coming out of that one. Unfortunately, they also lost Mike Evans with the hamstring. So, really a big blow for a high-performing offense to lose both of its top wide receivers in the same game. It'll be interesting to see if the Bucs make a move here going toward the trade deadline. Their offense looks good. They have played really well. Baker Mayfield has played really well. It's just a huge blow when you lose your 2 top pass catchers. The thing that I would be worried about, and this really is kind of been going on all season, that defense is suspect. Even going back to the Saints game, which, they won by, more than 20 points. Early on, that thing was a back and forth shootout. I mean, they let Spencer Rattler, who we saw look terrible Thursday night against the Broncos, they gave up a bunch of points to that Saints offense. And then they just got demolished by Baltimore. And I understand there might be some, in terms of the energy, right? It sucks, seeing your offensive weapons go down. But as a defense, I mean, you should be rallying when you see stuff like that happen. And to just get punked at home when everyone's watching on Monday Night Football, Todd Bowles comes from the defensive side of the ball, top-notch defensive coordinator for a long time. Him being the head coach, I'm a little surprised to see this defense playing as poorly as they have. Now, I do believe in the Bucs offense, but their defense needs to play better. So regardless of what they do headed into the trade deadline, from what we saw about Evans, this is not a season-ending injury, but they're going to be without him for at least a short amount of time here. And so regardless of when Mike comes back or anyone they acquire leading up to the trade deadline, if that defense doesn't shape up, they're not going to have a chance at the playoffs. The other one on Monday night, a little bit weird with the Chargers and Cardinals. Obviously, going into that one, you think the Chargers win that game. Justin Herbert threw for 1,000,000 yards, but give credit to the Cardinals. Jonathan Gannon, Kyler Murray, they win that thing. Despite, as I said, Herbert racking up a bunch of passing yards, Kyler Murray accounted for both touchdowns, one through the air, one on the ground. And Jonathan Gannon deserves credit. I think he is, and it might sound weird because we think of the Cardinals, it's Kyler Murray, MHJ, James Conner. I think this is a pretty good fit. Even going back to last year when they hired Jonathan Gannon, who was the defensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles on that Super Bowl team in 2022, it just seems like a good fit. I think he brings an identity to that team that they needed. Cliff Kingsbury, great offensive mind, but those teams with Kingsbury, the Kingsbury-Kyler Murray pairing always felt like, hey, it's exciting. They have good, explosive potential on the offensive side of the ball, but it always seemed to peter out as you would get into the back half of the year. And Jonathan Gannon being, a defensive guy, I think that was a great hire by the Cardinals. And I think we are going to see Jonathan Gannon as one of the kind of breakout coaches in the NFC. I'm not saying the Cardinals are going to the postseason, but it certainly wouldn't surprise me. I just really like this mix of what they have going on the offensive side of the ball in terms of the talent, but then also having this really great defensive mind at, or I should say, running the team. As far as the Chargers go, even though I didn't expect them to drop that game, nothing changes in terms of what I think their outlook is this season. I think they are a playoff team. I absolutely do not see them overtaking the Chiefs in the AFC West, but they are going to the postseason. They have completely taken the identity of what we know Jim Harbaugh teams to be, whether it's San Francisco or Michigan, and now the Chargers. Tough team. They play good defense. They run the football. They just have for lack of a better term, a tougher identity than they had under Brandon Staley. And ironically, Jim Harbaugh, a former quarterback, he's kind of old school. He just has a toughness about him that he puts his stamp on all the teams that he's coached. And I think they've got it going. Again, didn't see them losing this game, but I don't think it ultimately is going to negatively impact them the rest of the way. In addition to being tough on the field and playing hard defense and kind of smashing you in the face running the ball, Jim Harbaugh teams are typically mentally tough. And this Cardinals loss, while it's a little bit of a setback in the wins and loss column, I don't see this having a long-term effect on the team. It's somewhat weird because I remember when Brandon Staley took over, I knew he had come from Sean McVay's staff, but there was a couple weeks he took over 2021, I believe, with the Chargers. I remember thinking in the first few weeks of that 2021 season that he was an offensive coach. It's just something about the guy. Like, even though he's a defensive mind, he seems very kind of X's and O's guy. He's a schematics guy. He's not a tough guy. And that's where the irony comes in, is Jim Harbaugh, who is an offensive guy, whose background is playing quarterback, he gives off a tougher personality, puts a tougher identity into his teams as an offensive guy than Brandon Staley ever did during his time there. So, again, think the Chargers are still on a trajectory to win double-digit games, but did not see the Cardinals getting that one. But to their credit, they did it. And sometimes those are the kind of wins you look back to and you say, hey, that one gave us a little juice. It gave us a little momentum going into the rest of the season. That'll be it for Week 7. We'll have another episode later this week on some of the other developments and storylines, and we will recap the Thursday night game between the Vikings and the Rams. Thanks for listening.